And I can't hide, 'cause growing pains are keeping me up at night.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not represent or reflect the official policy or position of the Take a Paycheck Foundation and podcast. All information shared is from personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not take responsibility for any statements expressed during the podcast. Take a Paycheck does not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions, as it may pertain to your condition.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Paycheck. I'm so excited to have Janine joining me today. Hi Janine, can you give me a brief introduction about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your education, your career, your hobbies, what you've been up to recently.
All right, well, thank you all for having me. I'm Janine. I'm 36 years old. So my background is I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with business and marketing degree, which now I use that in the technology space as an account success manager. But on the sides, I'm overly involved with a lot of different hobbies. I run, I do triathlon. I'm on the board for the Arthritis Foundation, Western Pennsylvania. I also volunteer at the zoo, enjoy traveling. So lots of fun stuff that I'm always busy running around.
Awesome, thanks so much for sharing. So you're on this podcast because you're diagnosed with a rheumatic disease. What is your condition and when were you diagnosed?
Sure. So I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis officially at 16, but the journey really started at 14 years old. So I woke up one day and my knee was swollen, and it took 2 years to really go through that whole process of figuring out what medications worked, what was my diagnosis. And so now I am 36 years old. I've lived over half of my life with rheumatoid arthritis.
Can you talk a little bit about what those initial symptoms were and what led you to go see a healthcare professional?
Sure. So I was very active then, just like I'm active now. So I was very heavily involved in sports. I was in high school. I was 14. I started having swelling in my knee. I thought it was more of an overuse sports injury. I didn't know at the time that I always say, like, you could wake up sick and never get better. So that was really surprising. I did not know children could get arthritis. We went through about 8 different diagnoses. They did eventually start treating me for lupus, and then eventually we landed at juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. But it was the swelling in the knee. It eventually did spread to more than 5 joints throughout my high school career. So my knees, both of them, my fingers, my wrists, my ankles, my toes, like pretty much a lot that you could possibly be impacted. All of those joints were affected.
And did you have to miss any school or because of your arthritis?
So I always say, yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like it made me grow up a lot faster, and it's definitely made me a better person in the long run, because I just think you develop a maturity that you didn't really realize at the time that you're going to have to tap into so young. So I would say I went from, managing my social calendar and activities like a normal 14-year-old to also then being responsible for managing doctor's appointments and my own incurable illness. Missed a little bit of school here and there, obviously, to go to my appointments, especially during that initial 2-year phase between 14 and 16 when we were trying to figure out what was going on.
Okay, and especially during high school and being kind of initially diagnosed, then how did that impact your social life? Or like, how did you tell people that you had arthritis after just like being diagnosed yourself and trying to understand it for yourself?
Yeah, I'm not really sure people, the kids, right, understood what that meant. I still really wasn't sure what that was. So I think people are just like, oh, arthritis is for old people. Maybe you're just like over exaggerating, things like that. People don't understand. They don't have the open mind. Again, like I didn't know that children can get arthritis and that it is an incurable illness that you kind of have to manage. So that was definitely a little bit of more of an isolating factor, especially during those formative years, which are already isolating on their own. So it does make it a little tougher on the day to day.
Yeah, that makes sense. And did you have any accommodations in high school?
I don't really remember. I mean, that was a little bit ago. But I will say definitely had some bandages and compression. And I remember getting the nickname Ace for Ace bandage, because it was always like I would have something different with an Ace bandage, because depending on the day, depended on which of my joints were like openly impacted, or you can't tell under, your slacks that maybe you have a knee brace on if it's like smaller versus if you have something on your wrist or something else. So definitely got a nickname as Ace.
Because I find that, especially like during high school, And because you're initially diagnosed, you need to like kind of figure out how are you going to navigate school with all these aches and pains. So,
Right.
how did you navigate school with basically having pain and inflammation everywhere?
I think about it now and I'm always thinking the same question. I'm like, I really have a hard time believing how much I was able to get accomplished. And honestly, my personality is always like, I'm super outgoing. I'm super optimistic and hopeful at all times. Like if you tell me like I can't do something, I'm probably going to figure out a way to do it anyway. So, during high school, my goal was always to play collegiate soccer. And at that time, I was playing multiple sports in school. I still continued all of my sports. I never quit. I would play soccer with a swollen knee, and I was still getting recruited by soccer teams, which was really special for me. I think that really helped me tap into that inner strength because I was just like, had that goal, not only to get through high school and be healthy, but also my dream was to play collegiate soccer. So I think I just kind of had my blinders on in some ways, stayed hopeful, and was like, that's fine. You say that I'm not going to be able to do it, or it's improbable that I'm going to be able to play collegiately. And I said, it might be improbable, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah, you definitely had more of a unique mindset that not many people when they're diagnosed have. And I think also like making sure that you're still taking the precautions because you obviously don't want to like injure yourself further or anything like that. So that's really interesting. At your initial kind of visit at the rheumatologist, I guess, like how did your diagnosis journey work in terms of what were those conversations like? How did you get to that rheumatologist appointment? What was the environment like?
Sure. And I don't remember how many different doctors we inevitably went to. Luckily, I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we do have a really good healthcare system. I know from some of my background with volunteering with the Arthritis Foundation, and actually I volunteered at the Arthritis Foundation camp, JIA, or Juvenile Rheumatoid Reaching Achievement, so JRA. And I found out how many rheumatologists were really lacking. And so there's only really two cities in our state, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, that have the resource. So again, I was very lucky to live in a place that had a big hub of doctors. So I remember going, obviously, they were saying, I had a Baker's cyst. They said Osgood Schlatters degree, syndrome. Did I have lupus? Did I have fibromyalgia? I mean, we just went through it all and just a ton of tests, right? You're just always getting blood work and figuring it out. And eventually they did think it was lupus and we started treating that down the line. And then we switched eventually to JRA.
So they thought it was lupus?
They did, yeah. So not surprising, the medication that they were treating for what we thought was my lupus at the time was the same treatment for the JRA. So we just kind of kept on that course, but changed my diagnosis. I became very good friends with my pediatric rheumatologist. I was with him basically from 14 until he moved out of the country to his home country of Singapore when I was 21. And so he and I became really good friends. The people on staff, including my doctor, they were actually my referrals on my resume. There was a caseworker that worked at the hospital. She became one of my referrals.
Oh,
So
wow.
I just made everybody, as I said, very outgoing. So I was like, cool, we're in this. All right, we're a little family. Let's go. So I had really lucky support in that way.
Yeah, it looks like you kind of took it as like a positive way to like spin your diagnosis a little bit. So you said that you were in that pediatric kind of realm till 21. When did you transition care to like an adult rheumatologist?
Yeah, so well, my doctor, he was originally from Singapore, and so he was leaving. He was going to keep me forever and ever and ever. So he was going back home to his family in Singapore. So that was when he said, hey, I have some bad news. I can no longer keep you as a patient. You're going to have to transition to my colleague, in the same healthcare system, but for the adult. But at the time, I recall, we had been together for so long. I was always the oldest patient. So one of the things we used to do is we used to play tricks on the medical students, or if I was coming in to get my knee drained, I would look at it and that would kind of freak them out because they were pediatric. So they weren't really used to somebody being a little bit older. I was obviously not, well, not obvious, but I wasn't crying. I was kind of used to it. So I was a good test patient, right, when they were coming into the pediatric realm. So we would play jokes on them. And then before he left, my college boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he made him come in and he like gave him a speech and met my husband before he left. So, and then he transitioned me over to a very good colleague of his who was the head of rheumatology.
Wow, so it was like a good send off.
It was.
And you mentioned your boyfriend, now your husband. How did you tell him you had arthritis?
One, I was on injections at the time while I was playing soccer collegiately. So we were dating. And so then at some point you have to say, hey, I have to do my injection. This is what it's for. He was actually a medic in the army. So I don't think he was like overly, not the concern is the right word, but he wasn't freaked out by it. You know what I mean? We did learn that first semester he liked to go camping. I said, I don't know if I should be camping. And we went camping for spring break. And I remember I woke up and everything was swollen. It was the worst flare
Yeah.
to this day that I ever had. And I remember I woke up and my fingers, both my wrists, both my knees, both my ankles, my toes. And I actually was taken to the hospital and they just put me under anesthesia and just like took care of the fluid and gave me injections and kind of got me back. And he stuck around. So that was a moment. And that was the last time I went camping also.
That's so
I'm
funny.
like, I told you, I'm not really a camper.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, how does he support you now? And like, how did that change from when you were dating to now being married?
Sure. I mean, actually, even in college, depending on which medication I was on at the time, I was on several different injectables. There was one that was like the automatic pen. Well, for
Mhm.
some reason, even after years of doing my own injections, that pen, I would hear the click and then I would jump. It was just like this
Yeah.
reaction. And then you're like, oh no, there's a lot of money that I just wasted because I messed up my own injection. He was actually even helping me give myself my injections in college just because like I just didn't always want to do it. So very supportive. I mean, he's never mentioned it in a bad way. Whatever I need, he tries to accommodate, which luckily for me at this point, I don't have too many additional accommodations that I can't figure out on my own. But it's just nice that, he doesn't make me feel weird about it in terms of like that I'm ill or, less than by any means. So that's nice to have somebody very supportive to help me out.
How did your symptoms change over time? I know you mentioned that I think anyone sort of diagnosed it either
Yeah.
goes like it gets way better or it gets worse. How did that work for you?
It has been a weird and interesting journey for sure. I mean, this is now 22 plus years that I'm going on with rheumatoid arthritis, and my disease has changed. Even the joints that seem to be impacted or flare tend to be different ones. Luckily, I'm mostly under control these days, but it is interesting that it has just changed from being very severe. I'm no longer on injections. I'm on a low dose of medication for the most part, a pretty low dose, in my opinion, especially compared to the biologics and the injectables. And so, yeah, it just has changed by in terms of what's changed. So, like now, my other knee is the one that bothers me versus the opposite one that started the whole journey, right? So it just seems to move around, and I feel like every couple of years something comes up, and I'll have it under control, and then a flare will come on, and then you kind of start that process again. But I'm in a pretty decent place at the moment with it.
That's great to hear. And then in terms of, so you kind of had your life before your diagnosis without arthritis, and you've seen life
Right.
with arthritis. And I'm wondering, like, what were some prominent changes that you obviously maybe didn't even like that were happening? So, for example, for me, like, I found that because my hands were so impacted, I could not handwrite. Like, now I have to type things, or it hurts after a while to handwrite. So that's something that I'm like, I wish I was still in that situation where I would be able to do those things. But I found myself accommodating myself and like adapting to this new way of learning and things like that. So, what are some changes that you've made that you really loved doing or had to do or needed to do prior to diagnosis, and then now post diagnosis? How has that been for you?
Well, I feel the same way about writing. I hate writing. If you ever see my notebook, people look at it and they're like, "How do you read it?" I'm like, honestly, your guess is as good as mine, right? Like, I don't like to write, so I do try to avoid actual handwriting for the most part. I also just try to be more mindful of the foods that I eat, to be honest. I mean, I have a sweet tooth myself, but I know that if I eat, and I love a donut, if I eat that sugar, it can almost immediately feel it in my hands. So I just have to be aware of what I'm eating and what really causes that inflammation. So that's something that I wish I wouldn't have to deal with as much or think about, or just I'm aware that if I partake in something, that I may not feel great later. And it passes, but that is a big one for me. It's just being more mindful of what I'm eating.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned that you have been involved in soccer for a while and for a big part of your life. I'm wondering if you had any sort of mindset of like, oh, like I won't be able to do this anymore. I know you pushed through it, but I feel like at some point in your life you've probably been like, I don't know if I can do this. So did you
Right.
have that experience and how did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did. Luckily for me, I don't know. Sometimes I have a confidence and I don't know where it comes from, nor do I have a business having it. And sometimes, but I think just having that hopefulness was good. But in high school, I'm only 5'2". So a lot of people were saying I wasn't tall enough or big enough to play college athletics. So to begin with, I kind of always felt like people were doubting me, which always made me work harder in that fact. And so the same was kind of similar with when I started to be taking the injectables or when my swelling went from one knee to both knees or to my ankle, you know what I mean? As things were progressing, as I said, it started with just a knee flare. But by the time I had high school graduation, it was impacting 5+ joints. And I actually started injections the week I started my collegiate soccer career. And so it's first time going away from home. I was only 17 when I started. I was already this underdog. Then you throw on, in terms of not only being small, I also have to play with a knee flare. And I would sit there and I would play. And that was really hard. There were times, of course, where I was worried that it was going to get worse and I'd have to stop. Or if it impacted my level of play, then they wouldn't want me on the team anymore. Or I would lose my starting position. And that was always stressful because that was just something that was really important to me. Like my entire life is that was my goal.
So you did have people kind of doubt your abilities in a sense too, but you kept going and were really like brave and courageous to continue. So that's so great. Do you still play soccer now?
No, no, no. I not anymore. I think that's as I've gotten older, I'm good on that in terms of that physicality. But I compete in running, and then I also do triathlon as well. So still overly involved in athletics in the endurance capacity, but not the contact sports. I always say I don't need to get hit in the head with any more soccer balls. Like
No,
I'm
that makes sense.
yeah.
For college, did you end up moving out or was it like in your hometown?
No, I moved 4 hours away from my home. So yeah, so that was interesting. I was only 17 when I started college. My birthday's September. So like early in the semester I turned 18, but moved away, started injections, didn't really like needles, and then was trying to do my first semester of college academically and athletically and also socially, right? So that was definitely an adjustment period for sure.
How can you give me more information, I guess, on like how did that impact your social life? Like how did you tell your friends during college that
I
you
think I just told him. I just remembered like the first thing as soon as like my roommates, and one of my roommates also was on the soccer team. She was a freshman just like I was. And I was just very honest because obviously if you're going to see needles, right? Like you need to tell people why you have needles in your room or you have the hazardous waste
Yeah.
next to your bed, right? You have to explain those things. So I just was very upfront about it in general. And same thing with the soccer team. Like I just said, hey, I have this illness. Hopefully it doesn't impact my play, but I do take injections for this. So I may not feel my best, but I'll always try my best to play well and always have a positive attitude. I think somehow just always staying hopeful. Just if I can't control my body, I figure I can control my thoughts. And a lot of times your thoughts can really impact your body in some way, or at least I feel that way.
So did anyone have any sort of reaction towards your arthritis or was everything just sort of positive?
Everyone's like, okay, cool. Like, and I don't think again, if you aren't in it, I don't think you could ever really fully understand it either, right? Or if you're not, married or living with somebody, unless you're right there all of the time, you don't really understand it.
And what was it like living by yourself in college without the help of your parents?
Yeah, so that was difficult for sure. That was the change, especially being so young. And I always say that I do think because of all of the medical stuff that I had to have more of a maturity about myself younger. So I actually do think having that sense of, responsibility of myself at such a young age actually carried over well into collegiate life because other people do things a bit differently or a bit more reckless and things like that. And I just always had a sense of I need to take care of myself. So I actually think that carried over well. But of course, you still miss your family. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And were there any things that your family kind of supported you with prior that you found kind of hard to navigate when living with arthritis, like, sort of away from home? And also like where was your rheumatologist at this point? Were they like in
yeah.
your hometown? When did you visit them? How did that work?
Yeah, so I was also 4 hours away from the rheumatologist. I can't recall how many times, a year I was going at that point, but my parents would come up and get me at school, and they'd drive me home all the time if I needed to come home and get to my appointments and things like that. So they were obviously very supportive and hopeful that I was going to be able to push through. They always actually had their doubts that I was going to be able to do it as well. And again, for me, if somebody doubts me, luckily that kind of drives me in a lot of ways. So instead of being worried about that my family was concerned that I was taking on too much, I just kind of use it as a motivator instead.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so just kind of going and talking a little bit about, so not only were you a student athlete in college, but it sort of still, like, you're still athletic now. It still remains a part of your life even now. How do you manage your symptoms when doing like high endurance training and events?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I started with running, and I started running my last year of college. I actually did end up switching to cross country because I was missing a lot of school and classes to go to my soccer games. And at that point, I was like, I really need to get my GPA up. I need to focus on that. I'm not going to be a professional soccer player. So this year, I said, I think I'm going to have to focus on academics. And I made the difficult decision to no longer play soccer that semester. A friend of mine was on the cross country team, and they had some people that didn't return, or they were ineligible for whatever reason or injured. And my friend goes, Coach says you can be on the cross country team. You have to run fast if you play soccer. And I actually joined the cross country team my senior year. I switched. And then I graduated in 2010, found out I was pretty okay at running, got a desk job, and didn't do anything or any running until 2015. And my RA had gotten so bad because I actually took a job where I was sitting all the time. I kind of leaned on, I don't know, just like doing work and not, I guess I was like, sports are done, right? So I kind of sat around and gained a little bit of weight. I felt really awful about myself. My flares were worse than they had ever been. And then I had to get a new doctor. My one retired. They actually made me go through proving I had arthritis all over again. My flares were bad. And this was like the worst time in my life. And I do remember at that point, I was like, well, everyone else will eventually feel bad too. And then I was like, you are 24. Like, you need to snap out of this and make a change. Like, you can't just give up on life. And so a bunch of people I saw had competed in a 10-mile race here in Pittsburgh. And they were people that I knew in high school. And I was like, I didn't really think they're that athletic. If they could do it, I could do it. And so I just slowly built up and started running and did my first running race in 2015, the Pittsburgh Half Marathon. What would happen is my flares were still bad. So I would obviously rest when I needed to, right? I would say, do what you can when you can. And so sometimes that meant cross training, or yoga or cycling or swimming. Well, that's what led me to the triathlon, because I was like, well, if I'm already running, biking, swimming, why don't I just try this other event? So it's taken me to good places, and a lot of that has come out of adapting because of my illness.
What changes have you made to your training, like, ever since you were diagnosed?
Sure. Believe it or not, for me personally, I actually, whenever I have like a knee flare, that's always usually the one that's greatest impacting, because that's a joint you use a lot, and in general, especially if you're going to be running, biking, swimming. And so I just try to make those accommodations, and sometimes actually running or cycling or swimming actually make me feel better, even if I have a flare. And for whatever reason, it even sometimes helps the flare last a lot less. Like, I'll feel better. So my doctors have approved me to work out with it. So they just say, hey, you're not going to make it any worse. You just may be uncomfortable. But I do what I can when I can, is what I say.
I think it's so important to also like know your limits, and it sounds like that's what you've kind of understood over time too, and not to like push yourself too much, but also make sure that you're able to do what you want to do. So I'm glad that you're able to figure that out. I know you mentioned that there was certain instances where people kind of had like opposing comments to what you were doing in terms of being athletic. So why did you find that it was still important to keep this like athletic side of yourself part of your life despite all the comments that you did get?
Right. Yeah. So I would definitely say, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, sometimes I think about it, especially as I get older. And so it's definitely my identity in a lot of ways is the athletic side of me. And then it's just very important to my identity. I've also expanded and now say, okay, I'm not just an athlete, I'm also an advocate as well, for the arthritis community. So I do try to balance myself out now that I realize I'm getting a little older. And but yeah, it was just really important, like to never lose hope and never lose your goal. Just because someone says like it's not probable, that's fine. I'm gonna try anyways. And like you said, well, I'm gonna figure it out for myself. It's that balance of pushing your limits, and then when you hit that limit, you go, okay, now I know where that line is, right? But I wouldn't have been able to do so much in my life if people would have told me to quit. I mean, just 2 years ago with triathlon, I qualified for national championships. And then at national championships, I actually qualified for world championships. Well, if people would have told me to quit athletics when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, what would my life look like today? What would my actual physical health be? My physical health probably wouldn't be very good if I just would have gave up. So again, that's why I just decided to figure out where my own boundaries are, and I listen and take that into account, but I don't let other people override my inner voice that I have with myself.
That makes sense. Like you don't want to lose your hope. And I also felt very similarly. Like a lot of people told me that I couldn't do science because I could not handwrite. And for me, I was like, that's like, I don't think you can say something like that. So I still like now I'm doing my undergrad in science and I want to pursue a career in the health field. So just like knowing that this is your goal and despite the comments, figuring out, okay, it might take me more time or I might need more accommodations or I might need to like take a couple of days off, but like knowing how to navigate that and still achieving your goals, I think that's like the best thing you can do with your condition. It just
Yeah.
it's hard though, like getting through those comments, and some people honestly just give up because it is hard to stay strong and resilient.
See, I agree with you. And so sometimes when I'm kind of like posting on social media and things, I'm like, oh, am I being annoying or whatever? But I think about how many people reach out to me on the side and say, hey, thanks for inspiring me to keep going. It's important that there are other people. There's going to be all that negative talk, whether it's your self talk or other people, just to have other people that are telling you, hey, stay hopeful. So at least if nothing else, I say I'm trying to put the positive spin on everything and look on the bright side. And I try to help others do the same. Like, don't give up. You can do it too, or do something. And just, I'm sure you've seen there's like a photo or like I don't know if it's like a meme, but it's basically like your goal and where you start. And it's like, it's not like just like an uphill, like you just always do well. It's kind of like, well, this is progress. Like it's up and down, it ebbs and flows. But it doesn't matter how you get there as long as you don't give up.
For
Just
sure. At the beginning of the episode, we sort of talked about transitioning of healthcare because it is like a
like,
really big part of people's lives when it comes to living with the condition. I think for me, like I never even knew that this was a thing for a long time. When you're in pediatrics and you're diagnosed for a long time, you don't really know that you have to transition unless it depends on the age that you're diagnosed. Maybe it's a conversation that you do have with your healthcare professional. So I'm wondering, what was the most challenging part of transitioning healthcare?
oh, well, that is an easy one. Oh, that is, I've had to do it several times and I don't like it. It's actually really scary. That is one thing I'm scared of because how little control I have over what my insurance changes or what's covered, what's not covered. There's so little um, control in that aspect. But at one time I've had to switch healthcare based off my insurance, and the doctor made me prove that I had arthritis from scratch, wouldn't give me my medication. So while I'm sitting there trying to prove, I'm like, I'm not respectfully like, I'm not on any drugs that are any fun to be on, right? There's no like other, like they're not anything other than for arthritis. So it's not like there's no reason for me to want this medication other than the fact that my quality of life is at stake. So while I was having flares, I was like, I am now going through every time I have this flare, all I could think about is this is irreparable joint damage. And you're making me go through this hoop again. And then I switched back to the other healthcare system, based off of employment and things. And then if you don't have the right person in your corner, or if you're not strong enough to advocate, you really do have to advocate for yourself or try to find somebody that you can agree with and align on. Well, then that doctor retired and I didn't care for him, but he eventually put me on the medication. I proved to him that I was ill, I guess, in his mind. And then he retired. So then I had to go to another healthcare system. And there's so few rheumatologists because there's such a shortage in the country that they were telling me I was going to have to wait 9 months to a year. And I called every single doctor that I could come up with, right? And I was like, I can't do this for another 9 months to a year. And all I could picture, I'm like, well, can you at least write me a script for 90 days while I figure it out? No, I can't be responsible. And I understand that, but I was trying anything I could. Luckily for me at the time, my dad actually works for the healthcare system. He worked at a hospital, and he said that he was responsible for selling tickets to a fundraiser. And I said, oh, I'll go. I'm going to go talk to all the people at the hospital. And sure enough, I made enough networking connections at that gala dinner, like having conversations, telling the president of the healthcare my story. Well, the next day I had an appointment. They called me and said, let's get you in. And luckily for me, again, that I was lucky enough to have access to that. But I can't imagine all the other patients that also lost their physician. And it's really frustrating. So I just always feel like I'm fighting for my life and I have to be connected in the industry just to make sure that I'm always aware that I'm able to advocate for myself to get what I need to have a quality of life.
And I think you only realize that when you do transition, because in pediatric healthcare system, I feel like everything is sort of given to you.
Right.
Whereas in the adult care system, it's more like, okay, I actually need this or I need that. It's not, there's like less questions, I feel, about the other things you need aside from just like going to your appointments. And
Right.
it's also shorter times. And it's hard to navigate that, especially like having those 1 hour appointments to like now those like 20 minutes appointments or something like
Right.
that. But yeah, I think you learn how to kind of be more prepared and become more mature and organize what you need to say to your doctor and just make sure you're concise, which are good skills to have, but I still wish that we had more time.
Right. I agree with that 100%. You wish you didn't need to be away, but sometimes you just realize how much is really riding on being able to be prepared and be willing to speak up for yourself if you feel like you need to.
A big part of living with arthritis is really just understanding your condition and then being able to explain it to other people, just learning more about your condition. So I'm wondering, how did you learn more about your arthritis and like what steps did you take to gain that education?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really got involved with the Arthritis Foundation directly back, I think it was 2018. So one of our major events is Jingle Bell Run. They have them all over the country, Jingle Bell Run 5K. And so I would always run in the 5K and I would place pretty well. And so someone found out that I placed like 4th place overall, and they found out on the board somehow. And they're like, oh my God, the girl with arthritis like did so well. We should make her the medical honoree next year. So then I had lunch with them and I became a medical honoree for the event for 2018 and 2019. As part of that, we go and, you have to give speeches about your story to different places, like to get sponsors at the event. Well, people were reaching out to me on social media. So then I was like, you know what, if I'm going to be this person that's outwardly having these conversations, inviting people in to my story, I was like, I should probably educate myself a bit more. So I said, hey, I want to be on the board. And so I had to apply to be on the board of directors for the Arthritis Foundation, Western Pennsylvania, and I was accepted because I really wanted to be in the know. I wanted to be, about half, probably a little more than half of our board is doctors. And then there's other people that are non-medical professionals like myself. And I wanted to hear what the doctors, the rheumatologists were seeing in the industry. So I really just threw myself in there so that not only would I be more educated for myself, but if people were going to reach out to me, I really want to be able to give them some hope, some information, and have it be the right information as well. So that is for me is something that's been super important. I mean, even advocating for certain legislature, being involved, what's coming down the pipeline to that level, just because sometimes it will allow me to get a jump on what I need to prepare for, what's coming, what kind of questions am I going to, or research now do I have to now arm myself. So I always say to people, please use me as a resource. I'm happy to help, just whatever it is, even if it's just listening. But that was really what I did. I just really integrated myself into the Arthritis Foundation family.
That's amazing, and I'm glad that that's been such an important and good support system for you. How are the friendships that you've made in the chronic disease community different from your personal life?
So actually my shirt that I'm wearing today, this is actually, it's a Hadley's Heroes. So Hadley, her mom is on the board with me as well. So Hadley, she is now 9 years old, 9.5, she'll be 10 soon. She was actually diagnosed with JIA at the age of 2. And so her mom has her whole team of Hadley's Heroes. She's amazing at fundraising and getting things, really people getting involved in the community. And now she's one of my best friends. And we're working on our second year of co-chairing the Walk to Cure Arthritis Pittsburgh event in May. And so it's just when people get it on a different level, it is just nice to have that additional connection with people. Because I always say, there's nothing I'm more passionate about than my own incurable disease. So if somebody else shares that passion to bring awareness and to raise funds and just to have that level of understanding, I just think it makes it easier to have those personal connections just from that.
Yeah, I think also it's interesting because having friends that don't have arthritis and having friends with that do have arthritis, you really get to see the different types of conversations you may have with them. And I think like being involved in this community has also taught me like some certain things that I guess my friends without arthritis should and should not say.
Right.
Right? Because you find yourself sometimes like even acquaintances and peers and people around you say comments that maybe they could word it slightly better so that you don't feel kind of stressed out or offended in any sort of way. Do you have any worries about your condition? I know this is like such like a broad question, but living with arthritis.
Oh, I do. Yes.
You do?
Yes. My biggest concern is honestly at this point, the long-term effects of my medication on my internal organs and systems.
Same here. I that's something that I've been thinking about. I'm like, how long am I going to be on this? What is going to happen? When do I ever get off of this? Like, I can't be on methotrexate for the rest of my life.
So one of my medications is methotrexate. So I used to be on the injections. Now it's like 6 pills every Friday along with my Plaquenil, right? That's my current regimen. It was working for me. So just recently in December, I saw my rheumatologist and we were having this conversation. She said, all right, we'll try to take 5 pills instead of 6. Let's see if we can start weaning you off. You haven't had a flare in a long time. Do you want to know, like last week, I started having stiffness in my knee and now I have a knee flare for the first time in like a few years. And it's like, oh, okay. But I'm always going to keep trying. Like I understood that I was taking a risk of trying to change, but I couldn't. I'm like, in methotrexate, I used to call it the M word because it would make me cry. Like I'd be very upset. When they told me I had to go back on it, that made me upset. So I'm always trying to find the least amount of medication that I can be on, but still be controlled. But that is 100% like my number one concern.
Same here. I've heard lots of people go into remission, and then even when they go into remission, after a couple of years, they get a flare up. So it's like, how do we navigate that?
Right. Well, I think I could be, I don't want to misquote, but there's a percentage I have in my head, but it's a very low percentage of people that truly could ever go into remission. There was a time where we went off my medication, and this was about 10 years ago. Sure enough, nope, it came back, and it came back worse than ever.
Yeah, there's lots of stories like that.
So I keep trying. To figure out, well, maybe I'm good now. And then I'm like, all right, not as good as what I thought, but I keep I'm going to keep trying, and I keep trying every couple of years. I mean, especially as I get older, I just feel like I'm not the same. Well, it's the same body. It's quite different than what it was at 14. So my hope is that I'm going to continue to test the waters like I do with everything, push my boundaries, and then reassess as needed. So
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And you're right, when you're initially diagnosed compared to where you are at right now with your diagnosis, it's completely different. You've definitely grown more. You've learned more skills on like pain management, how to manage your life effectively, and just like growing up with this condition. I think it's so different because you really rely on your like parents and people around you when you're younger, but now you have also like a smaller like support system of people that live with you on a day-to-day basis that can help you. How do you manage your thoughts and keep like somewhat of a positive mindset?
right. Well, I just figure it doesn't do me any good to worry about something that I can't control. Like I'm aware of the things I can control and the things that I cannot control. I know that I need the medication, so I continue to take them and try my best to try other avenues and eat well. And I just tried again. I figure it doesn't do me any good to my mind. I can control my thoughts in a lot of ways, right? So if I keep training my brain to look for the silver lining or be more positive, I'm going to do that because that is a thing I can do to really push forward and stay positive. And again, I really do think a positive mindset really does help. I don't like because I think if you're worried, it stresses your body out, right? Like so I just think I focus on what can I do to make myself better. And for me, it's controlling my mindset when I can.
I know we talked a little bit about your initiatives with the Arthritis Foundation, kind of your interest. You've been involved with the Arthritis Foundation in a variety of different capacities, like you mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about your responsibilities on the PA Race Planning Committee?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the first time I was really ever involved with the Arthritis Foundation actually started in college when I was a camp counselor at Camp JRA. And then most recently, I'm working on this is my 5th year on the local leadership board. I focus heavily on our social media and outreach to get traction and attention for the advocacy. And on the race planning committee side, I race, so it makes it easy to plan a race from my perspective as a participant. So definitely always working with the local people, the local running stores, and making sure that we're connecting with as many people as possible.
And I kind of know why you started to get involved in general with the Arthritis Foundation based on your own lived experience, but you were going back to the Walk to Cure Arthritis Pittsburgh event for the 3rd time as co-chair. When did you start getting involved with this event, and what kind of accomplishments have you achieved with this initiative?
Yeah, so I think we've definitely accomplished a lot. We're really starting to see more people returning, since COVID, a lot more people coming back out for the race, the fundraising, the advocacy. And then I've been bringing more people that are more younger to the races just because of my age, and my friends and social group tend to be younger. And so I think, again, just spreading awareness from my social media pages and all of that, especially just showing, like I said before, young people get arthritis too. And I think people are surprised by that.
I know. And I'm glad that we're kind of breaking those barriers and stigma to raise more awareness about it. Finally, I kind of also wanted to talk about ease of use blocks campaign. So can you talk a little bit more about the content you created for this campaign and what this was actually all about?
Of course. So the Arthritis Foundation at the national level reached out to me on Instagram, sent me a message and asked if they could send me an ease of use box. They kind of told me that they basically have all these different products, and they do like to get them like third party verified so that, it is like an everyday person that don't have like a vested interest. It's just to be for the betterment of the community, both from a science perspective, but then also people like me that aren't the science side of things, right? So they sent me a box of a bunch of adaptive tools so that I could try them out and see if, any of that made my life easier. So some of the things I know I got were like the Easy Dose pill container, which I love because unfortunately for me, between my medications, I take a lot of pills with the vitamins and everything. I have my pen actually right here, my Pilot ease of use pen here with a really good grip. I do like that grip. There was a hose, I forget what else I had in there, but I've been the gloves, the compression gloves. I've been using those to type for work.
Oh,
So
they're amazing. I have them too. Like I use that for everything, and I actually keep losing them, which is kind of expensive to rebuy them, but I just like I'm like I need it because it helps a lot even when I'm traveling and I need to like carry suitcases and stuff, like having something kind of
yeah.
supporting my hand is so helpful.
Yes, so I love that. So I just love that they're always trying to find different tools for people like us to use. They have the Arthritis Foundation stamp. That's the ease of use stamp from the Arthritis Foundation. They also have it on their website, like a whole ease of use. So it wasn't just the products that I had, they have a whole collection of things that are helpful. So I actually had people reach out to me on social, like friends of mine. Either they could use it directly or they're like, oh my goodness, like my mom would love this. So I was really happy that they reached out and it was a lot of information that I didn't even know that they had that campaign at the time. So very excited to get those products and I've been using all of them.
That's so interesting. I'm gonna check this out afterwards. I literally just searched it up while you were talking, but no, that's amazing. The twist cap and like all these different.
Oh yeah, the twist cap on the medication, the over the counter. I was like, thank you. My joke was, which I said in my video, I always laugh about the things I can't access for my arthritis because I have arthritis and I can't get into my pills. So
Yeah,
I
that's
always
so
find that to
funny.
be
That's so like ironic. Why are they making the medication not accessible?
yeah, exactly. So it's great because obviously with the pharmacy, they have the lids for that. So like I don't struggle with my prescriptions, but my vitamins or over the counter, if I'm supplementing, with an over the counter pain medication, that isn't. So the fact that they are starting to be more user friendly for people like us, it's super awesome just to see that the industry thinks of us.
For sure. So I wanted to end off this podcast episode with an advice segment. What advice would you give to those who want to continue their sport despite their condition?
Oh, sure. Well, just in general, I mean, as I've been saying, there's like three things, just advice for anybody, really. I just think getting involved with the community is a really great space because there are other athletes like us, right, that have it. So get involved, see what other people are doing, stay informed in terms of the industry, and always stay hopeful. You know what I mean? So involved, get informed, and just stay hopeful. Do your best and do what you can when you can. That's always my advice. And you figure out your own limits as you go.
Thank you so much, Janine, for joining me on today's podcast episode. We talked about your diagnosis journey, the symptoms that you experienced, your high school experience with accommodation, and kind of your friendship dynamics. You discussed in depth about soccer and fitness during college, and even now being athletic in your adult life. We talked about transitioning from pediatric to adult rheumatologist and the challenges that kind of came with that. You shared about how you learned about your condition and worries that you may have for the future, but also the positive mindset that you kind of keep. We ended off the podcast episode by discussing your involvement with the Arthritis Foundation and a little bit about your platform. So everyone, like, comment, subscribe. I will link Janine's social media channels down below for you to check out, and I'll see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Pain Check. Thank you so much, Janine. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I can't